How do you make dinosaur exhibits? How do you make them look beautiful, natural, and unique? Well, I don't know how you do it, but I know how I do it. A lot of people are struggling with making nature look natural, so I'm going to share my tips with you in this dinosaur exhibit design guide. Through mini speed builds, I'm going to show you how to make this exact enclosure look like 10 completely different exhibits. 10 different biomes in spite of the game's limitations. I also have a fun little thing for the enclosures for our smaller dinosaurs. I haven't seen anybody else do this yet, but I think you might like it, so stick around for that. If you have any tips, don't keep them to yourself, share them in the comments below. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up, and if you like this channel, hit the subscribe button and help your girl out. Let's start with a redwood forest, because of course those trees are our new toys in the game. I always add some 3D terrain texture to an exhibit just to make it look that much more interesting and alive and realistic. So I'm adding in a couple of hills, smoothing them out, and one thing I also like to do is adding a sharp bit of terrain like I'm doing right now by adding a hill and then flattening it out a little bit. It creates a nice texture, I think. I'm laying down dirt because I think that's a better match with the redwood trees. And then the next step is to add water and make that look natural by also deleting some of the edges. So it doesn't look like, you know, 4 circles like you just saw in my little example. You're just going for an odd shape. The first trees I always add are the threesome of trees. Just because those are the fullest and the easiest to drop down at first. You want to place these where the terrain is relatively flat because of course we know in the game trees like to have a flat surface, and these have a quite a broad foot, you could say, and they flatten out the terrain underneath them. So focus them on the flat areas. When you're placing trees, what you want to do is you want to spread them randomly, not evenly. You don't want an even distribution of trees all throughout your exhibit. You want to focus them in groupings and then, you know, spread them out a little bit. And also keeping some open areas as well. I'm talking while I was recording, but unfortunately my microphone wasn't connected. So that's why I'm doing this voiceover after the fact. You can just see I'm just going in one tree type at a time and placing them down just as I like it. Trying to keep it as random as possible and still keeping in mind the perspective that your guests will be looking into the exhibit. So, you know, whether it's going to be from a viewing gallery or from a tour, you want to make sure that the exhibit looks nice from the way the guests are going to be viewing it. I always go a little bit overboard with trees, I think. So now I'm just adding a little bit of rock texture around the lake that we have, and I'm replacing some of the dirt with grass because we want to add some foliage, some shrubbery to make it look more alive. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm choosing crag because I think that's the most dry looking foliage that we have in the game. You don't want something that looks too tropical, which, you know, most of the others do. So that's why I'm going with crag. It has that bit of a brown look to it, which makes it fit better with the redwood trees, in my opinion. Just fiddling around with it, just, you know, go with what looks nice. I'm adding some rocks to the water's edge as well, where they, I think they look the most grounded. They don't stand out like a sore thumb. And it's always just a case of picking and choosing. I don't want to add too many rocks because they stand out quite a bit in the forest. And yeah, just a little bit of extra rock texture, just to mix things up a little bit. And that would be our redwood forest. Next biome, desert. So obviously we're going to start out by laying in a lot of sand. What I'm going for is like the Arabian Nights kind of desert, you know, the typical kind of desert with camels trekking through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some rolling dunes to this exhibit. Leaving some space to add water later. What I like to do in like really deserty exhibits is actually hide the water behind one of the dunes, so it's not going to be visible for your guests either from the tour or a viewing gallery. But you can also add an oasis to an exhibit like this. It just depends on the kind of look you're going for. So if you're going for a really dry desert, you could leave it just like this and then add some water to this back corner. That's why I'm raising up that dune a little bit to hide the water that we're going to put back there. And you would place a feeder there as well. And, you know, your guess would be none the wiser. But to make it look a little bit more interesting, I'm going to make a bit of an oasis. So just dropping in an odd shape of water, as you always want to do. Never just go in with the positive water brush. Always correct it a little bit with the negative water brush, the delete water brush. So I've surrounded it with some grass, but again, not evenly. You know, there's not the same amount of grass on every side. Oh, I hate it when that happens. So just bring the water back in a little, trying to get that shape back that I had. So I'm placing palms around the oasis, obviously. Getting them close to the water. That's just where they'd look most natural. And also going in with some foliage, using Vibrant right now. What I really like to use to blend the grass with the sand is to go over the edges a little bit with foliage. You can see that the individual blades of grass help blend the two terrain textures. I also like using coastal a lot. Now, you could add a little bit more texture to this exhibit by dropping in some crag in other places of the desert. It looks really good when you're zoomed out because then the brown of the grass, of the crag really shows. When you zoom in, it is a little bit green. So you want to keep that in mind that you're not going too green with it, because next up is a savanna exhibit. We're going to go right into it. Again, I'm starting with adding some 3D terrain. I think the savanna exhibit is fine keeping mostly flat. So I'm smoothing it out quite a bit. I'm starting with dirt and we're going to mix that with sand. And what you want to do is use sand in the largest brush because, as I demonstrated, if you use the small brush, it's quite sharp. And there you go, when you use the big brush and the lightest possible touch, you can get a really nice faded effect. It took me a couple of tries here, I think because the battery of my mouse was almost dead, so it just kind of did whatever you wanted. But usually it's pretty easy to just give like this light dusting of sand. And the two terrain textures combined create this really nice dry looking terrain without looking too beachy or too deserty like in our previous example. So I'm just going back and forth with these two terrain textures until I get the desired look. And then we're going to further blend it by adding foliage to it. There you go. And of course it's going to be crag because it is our dry looking foliage. And you want to focus the placement of the crag on the sandy bits and not so much on the dirt bits, because it makes the dirt look extra green, but it makes the sand look darker and more brown, and that helps with the blend. Again, you can hide your water behind a bit of a hill, so that's what I'm just showing here to make a corner where you can hide some water. You know, it fits with the arid design. I'd imagine a tour coming through here. If you want to add water visible to the exhibit, I suggest you make it as shallow and small and pathetic looking as possible. Now, for an arid exhibit, I always use only these two types of trees. I just think they look the most like they would appear in a savanna. So I'm starting with just a couple of tree number 5s and then adding in quite a few of the tree number 2. Placing a rock in the water, and that's it. That's the savanna, sort of. The next biome we are tackling is grassland, and of course, as you know, after making sure everything is actually grassy, I'm adding in just a little bit of a hill curving through the exhibit to make it that much more interesting. It's just something I always do, and it's always the first step, because it's always 3D texture, water, and then adding in the individual elements. I'm laying down a stream right now, and you can see me cutting it off at the very edge, but then placing the stream back in. One tip I always recommend doing is when you have a body of water, like a stream, as in this example, continue it outside of the borders of an exhibit. Because, you know, a river wouldn't stop at an open fence. So if you want to go for realism, continue it outside of the exhibit as well. I'm relocating the hill a little bit just to flatten out the exhibit, because that's something I associate more with grassland, a more flattened area. Now I'm going to add in foliage, and I'm basically going to use every foliage type except for vibrant, because vibrant looks a little too tropical. And what I'm doing, and what I'd recommend you do as well, is don't place every type of foliage everywhere, but mix them up a little bit. You know, use coastal in one area, mix it with some crag, use grassland in one area, mix it up with some coastal, you know, mix it up a little bit. And then, as you can see here, I'm going in with the delete foliage tool, and I'm actually removing some patches of shrubbery to create shorter bits of grass, and that just keeps it varied. So here I'm showing you what it's going to look like if you replace the stream with just a small lake. I think I might prefer that look for grassland, you know, not too much water. And for grassland, I always only use tree number 2, and I use them as sparingly as possible. I do love my trees though, so I tend to go a little bit overboard. But that's grassland. Next biome on our to-do list is a swamp or wetland exhibit, and this is kind of my trademark wetland design technique. I just go mental with the water brush, as you saw here, and it ends up looking, you know, just like a lot of circles dropped in. So I go back in and I clean it up a little bit with the remove water brush, and that just makes it look more natural and not so much like a couple of circles of water drop down into an area. So I'm adding in some land, and wherever there is a larger patch of land, I add in that little bit of 3D terrain. So some hills and stuff. But there are different techniques to making a swamp. I'm just going to show you here. This is something I saw someone do on Reddit, which is just placing down random bits and bobs of path. And, you know, don't think too much about it. When you're done, go all out with the water tool and then delete the path. And, you know, you get these narrow strips of land and water. Something I also like to do is just cover everything in water and just go from left to right, adding in more land, cleaning it up with water, adding in more land, adding more water, and so on and so forth. And I like creating these really long, really narrow strips of land doing that. And that's, yeah, so that's another way you can do that. So there are 3 different techniques, and you can just pick whatever works for you. Just keep in mind that you make it look random. There's really no rhyme or reason to it. There should be no pattern to it, so just go all out. Here I'm mixing all kinds of foliage and adding in some vibrant very sparingly, you know, as a little finishing touch. I like the big tree for a wetland or swampy exhibit, just because they feel so ancient and almost kind of suffocating with the way they, you know, enclose you when you're underneath them. Another tree I always like for my swamps are the thicker palm trees. So I'm placing those next. Placing a lot of them. And then also a couple of these smaller palms. Just, you know, filling it in. Keeping it, keep in mind, keeping it random, not even. And then I like the regular tree brush, because those trees have vines hanging off them, and that just feels really swampy and prehistoric to me. So that's something I really like doing for my wetland exhibits. And I keep going back in with the camera to make sure that it looks nice from all kinds of angles when you're in there visiting your dinosaurs. You don't want to see too much of the fencing, you want to hide those. And you don't want, you want the enclosure to feel large. So when you're in there, you don't want to see the end of the enclosure, basically. With wetland done, we are moving over to a temperate forest, which I'm sort of basing on like a European forest. As you could have guessed, I'm going in with some hills at first, and I'm sharpening them up a little bit, just something I like doing. There you go. Smoothing out the back of it. You know, obviously you don't want to go too mental with any 3D texture because the trees really hate that. Adding in just the tiniest of stream that's gonna trickle into our temperate forest. I'm adding a lot of dirt to it as well because the grass looks really green and really vibrant, and you want to counteract that with some dirt. Adding some rock around the river. That's something I always like doing. Now we're going in with foliage, focusing that mostly on the parts where we left the grass, because obviously when you add foliage to dirt, it makes the dirt look very green again. I'm only using coastal and crag in this case, because I think grassland and vibrant both have kind of a tropical look to it. Even the grassland, because the leaves on the plants are so big, they really look tropical to me. So that's why I'm going with crag and coastal only. And I'm adding the big trees, tree number 5, and I think I'm also going to go in later with tree number 2. Those just work the best as a broadleaf forest that you might find in Europe or parts of America as well, obviously. Well, really, temperate forests are all over the world, but I'm sort of mimicking a European forest in this example, to the best of our abilities, of course. When you're placing trees, just keep in mind where your tour is going to go through, because obviously these things are going to be a pain for your tour tracks. Always happy when the red tree turns blue and you can actually place it. Now, because we wanted this to look like a real and thick forest, you do have to place quite a lot of trees to make it look convincing. But in the end, you know, it's worth the effort. Now placing some rocks. I like placing these rocks in the water and at the water's edge. Just adding in a little bit more grass. Nope, don't like the grassland one, so I'm going back to coastal and crag alone. And that's our temperate forest. From temperate to rainforest. Doing the same bit all over again, adding our 3D texture, keeping in mind where I want to add my body of water. I'm gonna go for a river that splits into 2 directions for this exhibit, creating a little peninsula on one side of the exhibit, raising that up a little bit. I really like the look of hills underneath the standard tree brush, because that really gives some height difference to the trees. Just looks really good that way. Adding in some dirt, sand, and rock around the riverbank. And then going in with the tree brush. You don't want to go like full on placing like a solid line of trees. You want to keep the brush at a medium size and, you know, place them with a lighter touch so you leave some space in between them so you can still visit your dinosaurs. Because otherwise, if they walk into the trees, you just lose them completely. And keep going back and forth to see what looks good. Again, this is another process where there's no rhyme or reason. Just do what looks good. For this exhibit, I was imagining that the tour was just going to drive along the front of it, outside of the fence, because we're going to put small carnivores in here, in my head. Obviously, I'm not doing anything with these exhibits, only showing you how to build them. So now I'm going to go in with some foliage, you know, to make it look properly overgrown and rainforesty. As you can see, I didn't really go that overboard with the standard tree brush. You still want to see the terrain, you want to be able to see the dinosaurs, you want to be able to see the river, the rocks. So try to keep your love for trees under control. Now for this exhibit, I'm going to do something a little bit weird, which I really enjoy doing as of late, and that is adding a shelter for our smaller dinosaurs. Now of course we don't really have a shelter for our small dinosaurs, or any dinosaurs, you know, this isn't Planet Zoo, but what I've discovered recently and what I really like doing is placing a restroom of all things in an exhibit. The restroom just has a really nice and natural look to it because of the thatched roof, and I think it looks well as a dinosaur shelter. You know, the door is always open, so they could walk in there. Obviously they don't, but it looks like they could, and you don't really see the sign of the restroom, so it works. From restrooms in a rainforest to my sort of Rocky Mountains type of exhibit, which I really love doing for Pachycephalosauria, as well as some of the medium and large carnivores. You know, it's just an awesome looking exhibit for awesome looking dinosaurs. I added rock texture throughout the entire exhibit, but we are going to, you know, bring back in some dirt and grass later. Obviously, I'm starting with raising a bit of a mountain range into the exhibit, making it as high and sharp as possible without losing too much space, because we will be adding redwood trees to this exhibit in place of pine trees. You know, redwood trees, they are coniferous, so they are the closest thing we have to something that looks like a coniferous or pine forest. So that's why I'm using those as stand-in. As you can see, using the small brush, I'm bringing in like little patches of grass and dirt just to liven it up a little bit, because the rock texture alone looks really, really fake. It's not the best texture in my opinion. So that's why I'm going back in with a little bit of grass, a little bit of dirt. You know, a little bit of dirt never hurt anybody. Now for foliage, of course I'm gonna go in with crag. It's really, even though I love coastal the most, crag is probably the most versatile of the shrubbery. One of the weird things to get excited about in a game, the kind of shrubbery you have at your disposal. So now we're gonna go in with trees, and I'm only using the two smaller sizes of the redwood trees just to make it a little bit less obvious that they are in fact humongous redwood trees. You know, by making only by only using the smaller size, I think they're passable as pine trees. Sorta. You know, if you squint. You gotta squint with this game, and you gotta play pretend, like placing restrooms in your dinosaur exhibit. Now to sharpen up the mountains, I'm adding rocks to them along the top ridge, just so the top ridge looks sharp and mountainous. This is where the trees are causing some trouble, unfortunately, but just place them wherever you still can. Going all throughout the exhibit, you know, wherever they look nice, drop in a rock. Yeah, no luck there, unfortunately. There you go. Unfortunately, that happens quite a bit, that an individually placeable scenery item deletes your water or your terrain texture. You know, just sigh and start over. That's all you can do. But I really wish we had an undo function in this game. Now cleaning it up a little bit with more rock, and then we're done. Second to last for this video is a tropical coastline. So you want to start with a body of water. It doesn't have to be ocean-sized, but just to get the point across. And obviously we're going to line that with our beautiful white sand as our white beach. And we're also going to add the texture to the water as well. Sand makes the water look light and thus more shallow, and rock makes it look darker and choppy by the way the light just naturally hits it from certain angles. And you want to blend the two with just dirt or grass in between. And that creates the illusion of different depths of water. Now, what I showed you here is what you don't want to do. You don't want to go full out with the tree brush. You want to leave like a little sliver of land in between, just to make it a little bit more interesting. You know, don't just add a wall of trees into your exhibit. Now I'm raising up the terrain a little bit to give some height to some of the trees, and I'm blending the forest with the beach with some coastal shrubbery. And that's basically all that there is to this coastal exhibit. I really like this kind of exhibit for raptors, kind of mimicking the raptors on the beach scene from the best Jurassic Park movie ever, JP3. And final touch, adding some rocks to this exhibit. In the water, I always go for the smooth rocks, and in the jungle itself, I like to put the jagged ones. And then we have our tropical coastline. As a variation on the tropical coastline, you can also do a more North American coastline. So we're gonna add a similar kind of ocean-side body of water in there, but we're going to make it look more like, you know, we're in Canada or something, you know, prehistoric Canada. Whatever. So again, I'm going in with the smaller of the redwood trees in place of pine trees. As you can see, I've mixed the rock texture with grass, and that just makes it look a little bit pine foresty, and that's what we're going for this look. Just really quickly dropping in some rocks to add some more texture to it. And some foliage to liven it up just a little bit. Alrighty, that's all I have to show you. I hope this video was fun for you to watch and helps you in creating unique exhibits with the small number of tools that we have in the game. If you have any suggestions, leave them down below in a comment, and on your way down, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, enjoy the game.